Hello and welcome to another weekly update. I hope everybody is safe and well. It is lovely and sunny here. I'm sorry if that's not the case where you are. I'm sorry if even if it is sunny, you are stuck inside and you don't have any outside space. You can spend the sun, enjoying the sun's rays. But never mind. We'll get through this, I'm sure. There's plenty of interesting things happening to keep you occupied though, so let's get into it. So I did a blog post a couple of days ago. This is very specific to Teams developers right now, and it's concerning throttling limits against the Teams endpoints of the Microsoft Graph API. Don't know if you know this, but Graph is a big collection of different workloads, of which Teams is one, but also you might have, Excel, Word, SharePoint, Intune, all these different workloads, and they all have slightly different throttling limits. There is an overall kind of service throttling, but it kind of comes down to each different area of Graph and how it's throttled. So there are published different throttling limits for different services, and some services kind of don't really publish their throttling limits and some do. Previously, Teams never really published in any kind of definitive way their throttling limits until now. They have just published very defined throttling limits, which is really useful for developers because knowing the throttling limits means that developers not only can write code that respects those, but actually it's very helpful in architecting and planning if you can understand roughly the parameters in which you're allowed to play. It's not to say you shouldn't also handle 429s and handle throttling, because those published limits may change and also they may temporarily go down by quite a lot. We're seeing things like this current pandemic that we're in. Of course, there's variance and fluctuation in Graph response times and throttling limits, and I don't think anybody would expect that to be any different. So it's important to still deal with 429s correctly, but having published limits I think really helps. What's interesting about the limits, and I'll put them all on the blog post so you can go look at them as well as a link to where they're published. There's actually kind of two types of throttling limits to be aware of. There is the standard, this many responses per second for your application, and if you're a developer you should absolutely be aware of those. But actually there's something for IT admins as well, because there's an overall limit across all the applications accessing data in your tenant. So if you have a number of different applications, they may all be within their own throttling limits, but they may still get throttled because overall against your tenant you're exceeding the overall throttling limits, and that's something that really only you as an IT admin can see. But individual developers won't be able to kind of know whether or not their application is being deployed alongside other applications. So definitely one to be aware of. There's some other specific advice as well about polling, like the fact that you should only do it once a day, for instance. And if you are polling, you should use message deltas, specify date ranges where it's supported, and things like that. These are all kind of acceptable terms of use for using Graph. So definitely worth a read if you're a developer. Make sure you understand these restrictions, make sure you understand the rules, make sure you're not in violation of them, because there are penalties if you do violate them. Lots to take in there. But it's all really useful information. Oh, this sun is so bright. It's all really useful information for both developers in writing their applications, but also the architecture of planning. Okay, next. Really good blog post last week, actually all the way back at March 17th. And it's by Scott Hanselman, whose blog posts are always worth a read. But this one specifically was aimed at people who are spending more time at home and want to kind of pimp out their remote video solution a little bit more than just a webcam in front of them. It's about how you can have multiple webcams, almost like a studio, and control them. And without spending any money, you can do it all for free. It's all free software. He goes through a great blog post telling you how you can tie together various bits of software to make this really nice studio style setup with multiple webcams, picture-in-picture. I've played with it, it's really good actually. You can do lower thirds, you can do some video, looping video of it's kind of like a standby reel. There's loads of really cool things you can do. It's very, very interesting. It makes video calls much more interesting because you can kind of play around. So I thought that was good. And so if that sounds interesting, go and have a look at that blog post. It's good fun. All right, next. So this is Teams CQD data, so call quality data. There is a Power BI connector. I talked about it on the webinar that I did this week for Modality. In fact, if you go and watch last week's, or go and look up the links for last week's weekly update, you'll see the links to the webinar in that. And you can still watch it, even though you won't be able to watch it live. If you missed it, you can watch the recording. But I talked about the Power BI connector for CQD. This is a good blog post by Sunny Sachaho, Microsoft kind of super in charge of all the CQD stuff for Teams. And it's about building data. So building data is really important when looking at CQD. But building data is the thing that ties together a specific user's IP address to something meaningful, like floor 7, building 32, this town, this country. Building data is it's just a file that you can upload and you can associate to your tenant. And then when you do that, all of the CQD kind of lights up because all the CQD reports are able to place on maps, where all the calls are happening, where the poor calls are happening, where the good calls are happening. And so this blog post goes through quite a cool idea, actually. I'm surprised I didn't really think of before. But the idea is you can download all the IPs from your kind of CQD. You can run them up against a geolocation tool to get a rough idea of the lats and longs, and you can then create visualizations based on that. So you can get really nice visualizations of where all your users are across the world relatively easily. Right now, that might be a really important thing for you to do in terms of tracking where your users are at. If you're a big global organization, tracking where they are, overlaying perhaps the information about the COVID-19 spread and where the hotspots are. This might be a really useful way for you to get some insight into your data. And finally, I wanted to call out the All About 365 podcast because they have a new episode. They have more regular episodes than I talk about here, and they're all good. Just because I'm not talking about them doesn't mean they're not good. This one I thought was definitely worth listening to. And Jason and Steve, they're sharing their tips about how you can be your best when you're working from quarantine. Now, these two are kind of professionals at working from home, working from anywhere, using Teams day in, day out. They're both in quarantine at the moment, so they can give some really good advice for people who find themselves suddenly in this place. They may not have the experience of working like that. So some really good tips and kind of tricks as well for working from quarantine from two people who definitely know a lot about it. Right, that's everything I want to talk about this week. Like I say, hope you're having a good week. Hope you're staying safe and all the rest of it. Help your friends, help your family, help your co-workers if they're not super into Microsoft Teams and you are. Give them your support, give them your help. Don't assume they know everything because they almost certainly don't, and they're probably too scared to ask. So just kind of offer your help. I think that's how we get through this. All right, thanks very much for watching, and have a great weekend, and I will talk to you again next time.